Welcome to Political Sandbox by Chamber, the place where politicians get to show their ideas for improving our country. My name is Chris Hayward, and I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Policy Committee of the Corporation of City of London and a former Chairman of the City's Planning Committee. And with me here is John Penrose, the Member of Parliament for Weston-super-Mare, and I'm here to discuss his private member's bill that he's sponsoring on planning, which is the Streets Plans Bill. Welcome, John, to Political Sandbox.
Glad to be here.
Can I start by asking you, why did you decide to focus on housing and planning, and why do you regard those as so important?
Well, I decided to focus on housing and planning just simply because I think any MP will tell you that they're incredibly important. And the main reason is that it matters so much to so many people's cost of living and quality of life. So it's something which increasingly over the last decade or two has taken up more and more and more of almost everybody's disposable income. It's become harder and harder to afford. And so there's this huge sort of political problem with how on earth do we build an awful lot more homes, but build homes in the places where people want to live, and without encountering all sorts of problems with concreting over green fields or creating all sorts of environmental issues at the same time. So it's politically incredibly difficult. If it was easy, we'd have solved it a long time ago. Several and successive governments of every stripe have not. And equally, where you live is one of the central things of anybody's life, any family's, any household's life. And so if you've got good quality housing at an affordable rate, people are healthier, people are happier, and you get better communities too. So it's so central, and it's such a big problem, and it's a growing problem. So that's the reason why I just think we can't ignore it. We can't not do anything about it.
Sure. Could you perhaps give me a story, or in general terms, of constituents who have brought these sorts of issues to you?
I'm sure every MP can tell stories of constituents bringing housing problems to them, and they come in a fairly wide variety of examples. So you get people who are saying, look, I'm in a two-bed affordable home with the local social landlord, and we've just had another kid, or I've changed partners and they've come with their kids and we just haven't got enough space. So you get that problem. You also get people just saying, my children can't afford to live anywhere near here, where all their friends are, where their jobs are, where they may be able to need to look after me if the parent is elderly, if I become frail or in need of help later on, where I can see my grandchildren. All of those problems come to MPs all the time. And fundamentally at root, they all share the same problem, the same underlying cause, which is too much housing is unaffordable, and you end up with generation rent and people saying, I'm never going to get on the housing ladder if they want to, and many do. And so it's a sort of common refrain, and it's worse in some parts of the country than it is in others. I mean, your background is in the City of London and the Corporation of London, so that's probably one of the trickiest, the most difficult areas, but it's absolutely true in my constituency of Weston-super-Mare. There are a few places in the country where housing isn't so expensive that it isn't a problem, but they're very few and far between. And wouldn't it be great if everywhere was like them? But we're a long way away from that at the moment.
So let's turn now, if we may, then to your bill. What is the Planning Streets Plan Bill? What is the Planning Streets Plan Bill, and how would a street plan operate in practice?
Well, the bill is trying to solve a really fundamental point, which is at the moment an awful lot of people feel that the planning system and the development happens to them rather than because they want it. And they all want to have affordable homes, but why those buildings over there in that obstructing that previously unobstructed view, or spoiling something they're used to, and they don't feel like they have a say. They feel like they have notionally a say, but they don't feel like they get listened to. And again, any MP can give you a litany of examples of cases where, in spite of strong local opposition, basically it gets steamrolled through the courts, through the housing inspectors or whatever, and a local plan does not have local buy-in, either because the council has got other priorities elsewhere in the district, or because the local plan itself gets modified by other people at a more national level, or by the housing inspectors too. So the result of that is that the man or the woman in the street, the citizen for whom this whole system is supposed to be set up in the first place originally anyway, feels pretty disempowered, feels pretty distant, and they don't feel like it's working for them. And PS, they're still having to pay through the nose for their housing as well. So how is, this seems to be the worst of all possible worlds. So the answer, which I'm putting forward, is to say, look, you may not like the local plan which is at a county level or a district level. You may not like the national housing target numbers and the algorithms and all these other things that experts have to get involved in. And if you don't, and if enough of your neighbours don't like it either, you can effectively short circuit all of that. You can take it into your own hands. You can say, we are going to do this for ourselves, and the people in our street or in our immediate neighbourhood, very small scale, very local, can say, we're going to create our own plan. And it can be as simple as a style guide or development code that says, here's what it's going to look like. So we have local materials, a local style. It matches the best of what's there already. You get you lose the sort of anywhereville ubiquitous style, but it sort of matches the local story, if you like, and the local neighbourhood that's already there. And if you can come up with that, and you can get enough people to agree, and I'm arguing it should be a sort of super majority, more than just 50% plus one of your neighbours, if you all vote on it and say we want to do this, then at that point it kind of trumps all the other bits of bureaucracy that are trying to do something different for you, and you can then go ahead and do it, and you don't need any more planning permission. Now, you've still got to obviously comply with things like building regs to make sure it's safe to build. If you've got a heritage building, you've still got to get heritage consent and those sorts of things. But the fundamental thing is, if you don't like what other people are trying to do to your street or your neighbourhood, you don't have to put up with it anymore. If we can get this in place, providing there's local consent, it reconnects residents and puts them in charge of their own destinies.
So let me just develop that a bit further with you, John, if I may, because the bill states a minimum number or percentage of street consultees, including residents, households and commercial properties. So what is that minimum number? What is that threshold you're talking about?
Well, so I'm suggesting, but this is something which Parliament would need to debate and might decide they wanted it slightly higher, slightly lower. But I'm suggesting that you need to be able to say, look, this is an identifiable neighbourhood. Say it would be a street or a couple of streets or a particular or a square or something like that. And you've got to get 60%. Is my suggestion. So it's more than, as I said, just 50% plus one. 60% of the local residents to sign up in favour. So it's not just one person with a bee in their bonnet. You've got to persuade enough of them. But the point about it is as well that once you've got to, let's say it's 60%, but if Parliament decided a different number, that's fine by me, that's democracy. Once you've got to that number, it means that it isn't something that if you're my neighbour, you can't do it to me and I can't do it to you. It isn't that you can put an extension on your house which ruins my house, and I can't do anything about it. I can do the same as whatever you can do, I can do. So we both got to be happy because it's going to happen. We're both neighbours, but it means we both have the same rights and we both have the same opportunities, and that means that everybody has an upside rather than it being something which happens to you.
So the bill suggests that conditions would be attached to the street plan. What do these conditions look like?
So, well, most of them would be to do with things like development codes and style guides. So it's something which was originally being baked into the Robert Jenrick reports, Robert Jenrick's proposed reforms as well. And style guides can, if you talk to the folk at Create Streets, for example, they've got a sort of how-to guide about how to create a development code. But broadly speaking, it can, the basics are that you can define what the local materials might look like, so that if it's in a particular part of the country where things are often built in flint rather than brick, or in brick rather than flint, or in timber frame, that it matches that. That you can dictate style and massing, and whether or not how close to your neighbour's side walls you can get, and so on and so forth. So you aren't sort of invading people's light, and you can dictate the look and feel, so that if you're in the middle of somewhere which might look a bit like Pimlico, you carry on looking like a bit like Pimlico or wherever it might be. So those and it's actually that is a well tried and trusted development technique, and many of the people watching and listening to this today will be very, very familiar with it. It's actually a principle which used to be the way that most of our planning was done. If you look at lots of well-loved Regency and Victorian development in our existing towns and cities, they were all done from pattern books. And you'd say, I'll do a street of number of what it looks like on page 22, please. And you knew it was okay in advance because it had already been approved by the local government at the time. That's what you'd have here as well. So once you've got the thing signed off, providing you comply with that, then you're okay. If you want to do something different, you'd still have to get planning permission in the normal way, not trying to short circuit that in that case. But if you are willing to do that, then it just makes life quicker, easier, more certain, much less bureaucratic, much cheaper to get through all of that piece as well.
So what do developers think to the street plans ideas, and how would this affect the rate of construction?
So my guess is that for a lot of the bigger developers at the moment, they won't be terribly excited by this. I can't see that they necessarily be terribly upset by it, but I don't think they'd be terribly excited because it doesn't kind of match their current approach and their current business models. I'd love them to prove me wrong. If any of them are out there watching and you want to call me and say, no, we want to get behind this, I'll take your call any day. That'd be great to hear. But I think that probably the people who are going to get most excited about this will be smaller scale developers and builders who might do a bit of development and might have done some in the past but have been dissuaded and discouraged because of the complexity and the difficulty of the existing system. And I think one of the opportunities that this creates is to get a whole load of newer small-scale entrants into the market, doing a couple of houses on a street once these plans have been agreed, or for existing small-scale players to bulk up a bit and become more specialist in this sort of an area. So I think there's quite a big opportunity for new entrants and for entrepreneurial folk in this area to sort of to step forward and take a bigger role. And I'd love to be proved wrong about the big developers too. Call me, guys. I'd love to hear from you.
So in what circumstances would a compensation be payable by street consultees?
So I'm not sure that this is terribly likely, to be honest. The idea of compensation implies that there's going to be damage created, and the whole point about this is that it actually is an opportunity for everybody to be able to benefit from an opportunity to expand, to develop, to redevelop, to reinvest. So it ought to be mainly upside, but providing we can get everybody to sign up to it, and so you and I as neighbours have those same opportunities. That's not to say that existing things, if for example you ended up with a development code which included party walls because things were being built as a terrace, the existing rules about compensation, party wall agreements, and all those other things would obviously still apply. I'm not trying to change any of those. But I think that's where it would be, unless you were driving at a different point, which I've misunderstood your question.
No, absolutely. That answers the point beautifully. Thank you. Given the change in leadership at the new Ministry for Levelling Up, has the government's position changed?
Well, so I think understandably, Michael Gove, when he arrived, sort of declared a bit of a pause while he sort of read the files and made sure he was comfortable. So we'll have to wait and see where he comes out. I'm hoping that two things will happen. One is I'm hoping that he will grab my bill and say, this is wonderful, and even if my bill doesn't go through as a bill standalone on its own, that he might sort of pick the engine out of the car and plonk it in his vehicle. That would be wonderful, because I think it's an idea which it has the huge advantage of not costing the government a penny, so the Treasury will be happy, and it has a huge upside to bring in more development. We've just been talking about freeing up an awful lot of pent-up energy all around the country. And it does this thing of reconnecting local residents, empowering them, making them feel like they own the process. It doesn't happen to them. So I hope that he will like that. The other bit which I also hope he's going to go for is the bit that's adjacent to my bill and is the sort of core of some of the generic reforms, which is this idea about building up, not out, and having permitted development rights, but subject to development codes. So it isn't, you're not creating a free-for-all, you are still having those development codes. They are developed by your local council, so that there's proper democratic local control over what the look and feel of your town centre, that city centre, that neighbourhood over there looks like. But if he goes back and says, this makes sense and I want to do more of it, that's kind of a not quite as local version of street votes, but it could be a whole town version of street votes, and it could be equally as powerful as the next size up version doing the same sort of thing. Both of those, just on their own, I think could be transformational and solve an awful lot of the other problems without encountering all the pain and the angst and the flack of housing algorithms and all the other things which understandably create concern. Just doing those two things on their own could get him an enormously long way. And actually, if you think about it, if you did building up, not out, and street votes together, and you say that people can build up to, I don't know, 4 stories, 5 stories high, subject to a locally defined development code. On average, Britain's towns and cities, apart from a few city centres, are about 2 stories tall. If you say you can go up to 4 stories tall, or maybe 5, depending on local tree lines and local styles, what you've effectively done, just confining that to urban environments for the moment, not talking about outside towns or cities, what you've done in one go is you have almost doubled the amount of homes permitted space, permission space, in one decision at one go. Now, it would then take, 20 years, 25 years to build it all out over time, and it would be, there'll be a long old project to do it. But that's the single biggest, it would be the single biggest creation of permissioned home development space ever. At a national level, it would be much, much bigger than anything happened after in the home building days after the Second World War, and it would be enormously transformational and empowering, I would argue. So there's an opportunity for a really big decision, which then will reap benefits both economically and socially for our neighbourhoods, for our society, as well as for the Treasury and for local governments up and down the country. It could be absolutely enormous if he reads the files the same way I do. Big question. It's up to him obviously. But I think there's a really big opportunity for him there. If I can only persuade him, and others can only persuade him to do it.
So, John, you're talking about building up, not out. Do regulations proposed by the Street Plans Bill and Build Up, Not Out make it harder for developers to build homes?
No, I would argue that the whole point about this is it makes it easier. By effectively saying that the planning permission decision happens in advance, and providing you stick to the recipe which is laid out in the development code, and providing you follow whatever's been agreed at the street votes, very local plan. If you follow that recipe, then you've got planning permission, and all that, all those bits of forms you've got to fill out and everything else you've got to come up with, basically gets collapsed down into something much, much smaller, and you've got the certainty in advance that you don't have to worry about it. It's just all done. And I think that makes it an awful lot easier for an awful lot of the smaller players, as I mentioned before, developers and builders. I think it makes an awful lot easier for self-build people to come in and do things. And it just will release an awful lot of energy because people will not feel so scared about it. I mean, at the moment, if you're a big developer and you know the thing backwards, you're not scared of it at all. But everybody else, it's a bit of a sort of a daunting old Hector to try and deal with. So I think it should make it dramatically easier. The bit which it won't change, as I mentioned before, but is really important to emphasise, is it won't change things to do with building safety. That has to be sacrosanct, and rightly so. And of course, if you have a heritage building, then that's a slightly different kettle of fish too. But all the other stuff, I think we can simplify dramatically for anybody who's willing to follow the recipe. If they want to do something different story, that might be a bit more challenging. Probably stick with the existing system. But for most people, this will just simplify things enormously.
Sure. So last week's budget promised 1.8 billion to go towards building homes on derelict or unused land in England as part of the government's 24 billion housing package. How will this money benefit communities across the country? And I guess that obviously your constituency of Weston-super-Mare.
Well, we've already got a couple of brownfield sites which are being redeveloped on that basis. Yeah. Potentially enormously. Not potentially. It is enormously valuable. And any community and any MP sitting here will be able to point you at sites in the middle of their local town, in the middle of their patch, which have been sitting there waiting to be redeveloped for far too long. So this is great in that it sort of unlocks many more of those sites. The bit which I'd also suggest we want to do a bit more of as well is, I think that that's a carrot to free things up, to get things moving, all very valuable. I think there may be a case for, alongside the carrot, a little bit of stick too, without wishing to be unkind or unpleasant to anyone, because I think that at the moment, if you can sit there with a derelict site, which perhaps may need some remediation and might be quite expensive to remediate, depending on what was on it before, and basically the carrying cost of that site is relatively low, particularly at the moment with interest rates quite low, then actually the sense of a burning platform of needing to get on with it because my balance sheet's going to suffer if I don't do something with it soon is not there. And in economics terms, that means that the velocity of money is much lower than it needs to be. So alongside what the Chancellor rightly did last week, I'd like to see us also saying, actually, do you know what? There should be, if you've got a derelict site, whatever was on it before, you should carry on paying council tax on the basis of whatever planning permission it had before, even though you may have levelled it. As a way of just saying, look, you've got to get on and do something with this. This isn't something which is basically you can sit there and it's free until the right offer comes along and someone decides that it's too awkward to leave. And if we can get that sense of a burning platform too, then it stops being a one-way bet just governed by how patient you're willing to be. Yeah. And I think that might be a bit of a transformational thing for some sites, not all, but for some sites it might just move things along as well.
So the budget also announced 160,000 greener homes to be built on brownfield land, with combined authorities and councils receiving £300 million to develop these smaller brownfield sites for housing. We all know that to make it work, we have to somehow help local authorities and combined authorities to deliver on the government's promise.
Yes.
How do we do that?
I guess my street votes bill is designed to provide a mechanism to allow that to happen. The difficulty, I think, is that if you've got street votes happening, that will take a lot of the pressure off. If you've also got build up not out happening at a broader level across an entire town, that will take a lot of the pressure off. The difficulty at the moment is that if you've got a housing target, you've got to make sure that those two initiatives, neither of which are quite so directly controlled by the council anymore because it's pre-permissioned, not permissioned at an individual site level, that those sites they're given, the local authority is given credit for those sites that they've just created. When someone comes knocking and saying, hang on, here's your 5-year land supply and you haven't got there isn't enough of it. And you say, no, actually, we've just permissioned that entire district can now go up from 2 stories tall to 4 stories tall. That's the equivalent of X thousand new homes. That should count. And I think you've got to create that kind of a recognition of what the council's decided in order to make it clear to them that this is both real and also it's worth their while to get the planning inspectors and the developers' lawyers off their backs. And I think again it will just mean that local people feel that they are being listened to, because it reconnects them. And they say, well, actually that means that therefore that greenfield site that's being proposed by whichever big developer it is, which is not in the local plan but is nonetheless being put forward, that no longer needs to be done because we've got all these other sites we've just permissioned in and around the town centre which needs regeneration, has been looking for investment, and now all of a sudden there's a way to get that investment, a vehicle to bring that investment in.
John, this has been a fascinating chat. One final question, if I may, to you. Some have said that the opposition has carried on housing Corbyn and McDonald's policies, including a national mission to retrofit every home with insulation within a decade. With COP26 in Glasgow this week and next week, should the government commit to a similar target?
So all the research that I've seen, and I think that anyone's ever showed me and anyone else, says that that insulation is one of the most effective greenhouse gas reduction things that any of us individually, personally can do. And it's better than changing your car and all sorts of other things. It's just massively effective. And it also has the advantage of saving you loads and loads of money once you've done the initial outlay. So the simple answer is yes, we need to move forward on insulation. In fact, as we sit here, there's a demonstration going on in Parliament Square by Insulate Britain. They're all sitting down and annoying an awful lot of people who can't drive around Parliament Square. And they're making the same point, albeit not in ways that I would approve of. So I think everyone agrees, or I hope everyone agrees, on the destination, the outcome being the right thing to do. The question is how you get there. So there's a whole series of government programs already in place in order to encourage people to insulate their homes, and in some cases where they are less well off, to give them the upfront grants to be able to insulate their lofts a bit more or whatever. But as I think your question implies, actually in an awful lot of cases, really what you need to do is to put 20 centimetres of cladding on the outside of a two-storey home in order to really get that sort of last piece that's really going to make a difference. That's more expensive. I think that I would be very, very reluctant, and I think in a free society it would be very difficult to get democratic consent to start requiring every homeowner to start mandate them, because that's going to be handing everybody a bill of thousands of pounds, tens of thousands of pounds in some cases. So I think that's a very difficult thing. But I think that you can get a very long way, and we already have got quite a long way, by explaining to people, A, it's in their financial interests, B, it's in the planet's interests, in order to do that. Many people will, in the same way as 10 years ago, most of us wouldn't have known one end of a recycling bin from another, and now everybody does. And if you don't, then your neighbours like to look at you and go, hang on, why aren't you recycling your bins? So there's peer pressure now around it. And I think that's something which we can turn into more of a norm. And also, you can also, and we're already doing this, for example, we are requiring rental accommodation, and there's sort of a ratchet being built in saying you've got to get it to, I think it's your audience will know this better than me, I think it's a level C level of insulation in a couple of years' time. Now you can ratchet that up slowly over time, but have progressively better and better insulation for rental properties. And my guess as well is that you can probably encourage home ownership every time someone sells. Then there's an opportunity there to sort of provide nudging people towards doing the right thing there as well, if we can.
Well, John, thank you very much indeed for coming in, and can I wish you really good luck with your bill.
Thank you.
Chamber is the community voice, and you can join the conversation by following us on Instagram at Chamber UK, and you can also visit our website www.chamberuk.com, or indeed email us at info@chamberuk.com.